Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Procurement Currents Quarter 1, a quarterly economic outlook. Thank you for spending time with us today. We're glad you're here. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to explain the format of today's webinar. All attendees are muted. If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand or enter it into the chat or the Q&A box. After today's webinar, you'll receive an email in a few days that includes a survey as well as materials from today's presentation. Today's presentation is good for 1 contact hour. To receive your certificate, please complete the survey in the forthcoming email. Your feedback is valuable to us at NASPO, so thank you for completing the survey. With that, I'm pleased to introduce our speakers. We're honored to have the RFP Doctors from the Center of Procurement Excellence. The Center of Procurement Excellence is a nonprofit organization that focuses on improving procurement practices through education, training, and certification. Today's focus will be cost escalation, supply chain disruptions, workforce considerations, and new technology. Brian, please take it away.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We are excited to get going. I forgot to look in the chat to see how many familiar faces we have, but hopefully several. And please go ahead and throw questions in the chat at any time. We have several folks monitoring that, and we're happy to be interrupted. In terms of our agenda for the day, what we're going to do is a little bit of background, and then we'll dive into some of the overview of the economic climate and environment that we're in that was mentioned here. So we'll talk costs and supply chain spending, workforce technology. Basic ideas, we're going to do a fast zoom through of these things. If you've seen our team present before, it's possible that you've seen some of this, but we're going to go a big zoom through. This is the first inaugural session of Procurement Currents. And we want to set the stage here of what we're going to talk about quarterly going forward. And so after we talk about all these things and zoom through, we'll wrap up with some implications of what we think we are seeing and what it means for the procurement profession. So that's the game plan for today. All right, so I guess we kind of talked about what Procurement Currents is going to be doing. The next session we're going to have together is in August, and then we'll go November, February rotation after that. So starting out with our current economic environment, just wanting to keep you all informed of what we are seeing across North America and even beyond, depending upon where our attendees are coming from. Just going to walk through things that we think we're seeing out there that procurement professionals should be aware of. But you can chime in with questions, observations, and so forth in the chat at any time. So a couple notes. There's going to be a few sources of data that we're going to use to run through here. So number one is just publicly available data. That's a fancy way of saying Google and other sources that we've found and curated over the years. Now, our team's been tracking this for 15, 20 plus years. And then we also had a survey that we did called CPE's Procurement Checkup. That was sent out in March, April timeframe. Many of you, I think, who are here actually responded to this. So some of your responses will be included here, which is nice. So it's feedback from your peers all over the place. We had nearly 700 unique responses. And then in the latest round of that survey, 400 of your peers responded to questions about tariffs. That was collected in the first couple weeks of April. And so that was the first little bit of when all of this started to hit. So let's start with costs. And what you're going to see is whenever you've got this little survey moniker up there, that is basically saying that's from the 650 of your procurement peers across North America, largely US, who responded to the survey in early April. So we'll kind of show you what your peers are saying and experiencing out there. So in terms of tariff impacts on costs, what we're seeing here is a wide range of experiences in those first few weeks. So again, this is limited to the first few weeks of tariff impacts. Now, most folks are having some type of impact, but it's just pretty early, hard to tell early on basically is what's going on. A few isolated instances of projects being affected to multiple, but for the most part, it's too early to tell when this was all starting to hit in early April. Comments that you all submitted here about how tariffs are affecting things was that some folks were concerned, I think rightly so, about contractual and risk shifting that's occurring out there. A lot of owners or client organizations seeking to transfer tariff-related risks to their contractors or their prime vendors, who then sometimes are transferring that down the chain to subs and suppliers and so forth. In other words, we are seeing a lot of feedback, even from the procurement community, saying that we in procurement perceive that our organizations are trying to say this is too new, too uncertain, so let's pass along that risk to the vendor community, which is very risky, and we'll talk about that going forward here. Other impacts, delays, uncertainty. Uncertainty is going to be essentially the theme of the day here as we keep going. So some comments on tariffs there. Now, other things in terms of costs, these are some of the trends that are, these tariff impacts recently are built on top of. So we're fond of sharing this plot, which is a number of different commodity prices out there. And this is all benchmarked back to spring of 2020. And of course, the takeaway from this chart is just the wide range of volatility and how up and down things were. You can see in purple, we've got lumber. In this gray silver, we've got steel, gas prices up and down. It's very choppy. It's all over the place, huge peaks and valleys, and it's everything all at once, which is what made this time period so unprecedented. And this is all coming from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, US federal government data. And one of the things to note here is that the tariffs are not yet in that data. The latest collection here, it was released back in middle of April is when the data was last released. So their data collection period was actually in early to mid-March. So it was a little bit ahead of the tariff game hitting. So when you see the release next week for consumer price index and producer price index coming out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that theoretically will be the first data release from the government that actually starts to show some of the tariff impacts. But you can see some little spikes were happening in anticipation of the tariffs hitting. Here's our release schedule. So you'll see next week when this comes out on the 13th and 15th is when you get the next cost indice increases going out. And I don't know if Ken and Jake are in the chat, can mention this too. I haven't checked for news out of the Fed on all of that stuff. That's their meeting today. So, all right, more cost things to consider. So I've just handpicked a few items here that go across the range of what we might see as individual consumers or that our organizations might see in terms of things that we are procuring on behalf of our organization. So most of you are probably familiar with the consumer price index. You see that in the news. It's your typical basket of goods and cost of living. There's different ways that it's measured, but that's kind of the average American household is the way that is trying to be tracked. And we're up 20+% since spring of 2020. Now, you look at other items, though, transportation costs, food costs specifically, let's say construction costs, power, and so forth. You're seeing a wide range of cost level increases from the last 5 years. And it can be double or triple the consumer price index, which is a challenging thing because we as individual consumers might see things at the grocery store or in our insurance costs, transportation costs, and so forth. But for any individual contract that we may be procuring, depending upon the makeup of the items included in that contract, you could see a wide range of what the cost increases have actually been. This is a quick example. You don't have to read it all, but just a big listing of common construction materials. And you can see the percent changes. So like if you want to see percent changes in the last 5 years since spring of 2020, you can see a huge range. Some of the red here is changes that are more than 50% cost increases since back then. You even have some increases of more than doubling in costs. And then in blue, I've highlighted some of the lower increases, and those are still 20-25%, which is just massive in terms of historic comparisons. And everything in between, you still have an increase of 30, 40, approaching 50%. And then if you just look at even the last 1 month of change in these price levels, you're seeing huge changes even in 1 month. And if you want to take that to a forward projection of an annualized rate, just take any of these numbers and multiply times 12, or if you just want easier math and say it's all uncertain anyway, multiply by 10, and you're seeing some huge increases here. So Any given month, things can swing quickly. The first few months of the year here in 2025 have been some of the quickest, fastest increases in pricing levels that we've seen since the peak of the inflationary hit back in 2021, 2022. For example, construction alone has an annualized price increase projected out to be close to 10%. So the cost levels are all over the place. Now, what does this mean for us in procurement and for our organizations? I'm going to share a few examples. I kind of want to caveat this in the beginning just by saying that we're not passing any judgment on these cases, not saying it's good, bad, or otherwise. These are just illustrative of common reactions that we have as buyer organizations when we're struggling with our budgets being blown and prices being, more than what we are expecting. And maybe it's a better way to start thinking about it is that our budgets were incorrect relative to what the market can bear on pricing. So these are just headlines. You can find similar things on Google. These are just pure Google searches. We are not seeking out any individual organization here, just things that come up that you can see. And there's an increasing trend of this in the news, and you can go see it for yourself. But example. So here's an example of a renegotiation of a rejected bid that's going on. So I'll go through a couple items here, but in short, we've got a city that initially bid the project. Initial bid came in under 500,000. They canceled it because it was too high. 6 months later, tried again, got the same sole bidder, and now where prices are way higher. That's part of what's going on here as well. So we've seen this happen over and over again here. When prices are out of line with budgets, the temptation to say cancel and try again is something you're going to see a lot of. Sorry for the animations. Now, what that contractor was saying is, hey, some things were added to the scope that inflated the cost unnecessarily. They said that there were requirements that the owner put in there. They wanted to have job site trailers on site for a certain amount of time. They wanted full-time superintendents and so on and so forth. That's details, but basically one of the takeaways in a cost constrained environment here is we need to be very, very careful about the scopes and the requirements we're putting out there. If there are items that we think that we would just like to have, or we're not really sure if they're required, but we're going to say, let's go ahead and let's make it required because we think it might be necessary as a client, even though we don't know for sure. Just remember that the cost impact of including more and more things into your scope, that cost impact has never been greater. And it's something that probably should be looked at. And we have to consider that when we're getting feedback from our suppliers saying, hey, this may not be necessary. This is what's going on. And then this is something that pops up too, is when you're in this hard place as an organization where your budget is not adequate for what the market can bear, you start seeing these types of things, which I thought was pretty curious. So there's a quote in the news that said, well, hey, there was another unnamed contractor who's interested in doing this work at a more economical price, quote unquote, right? And hopefully your alarm bells are going off in terms of your good, solid public procurement instincts saying, wait a minute, are we talking to other bidders outside of the proposal process? What's going on here? Is that even ethical? But when we're having trouble getting projects to go, you start seeing these interesting things start to happen. There's other examples in the slides. I won't read them to you, but it's more and more of them here. Yeah, it doesn't pass the sniff test, Kirby. It's a little scary. You see that, and it's just openly in the news now. So other examples, right? Like, hey, here's our budget. The actual bids came in 4 times that. And then you can see the plan here is we're going to just proceed. We're going to do it ourselves. This is what this city said. This is as small as you're seeing this stuff affect something as small as just a dog park, right? So I'm giving you some construction examples or community examples as well. Another example here where we've got a housing project that failed to proceed due to prices being higher than what that client thought they were. And you see these quotes like, well, we believe we can get there. Will there be a slight delay or just a small delay? Yeah, delay, yes. But beware of these types of conversations in your organizations where your strategy in this case is just pure belief. There's not a plan. It's just belief. We believe we can figure it out. Well, how? Well, we believe, right? How it's going to be the impact? A slight delay. Another example, this was in the news a few weeks back, huge project over on the West Coast. And they said, we're going to say no thank you, we're going to cancel the procurement, we're going to change the approach to how we're going to do the delivery, and we believe that this is going to squeeze out risk from the project. And just think about what this sounds like. If you're saying that switching your entire approach to the project as a client is going to squeeze out risk, at least it begs the question, well, then what were you doing the first time around? Did you not think that that was more risky or not? Or was it more that you're just pivoting and trying to make it sound good at this point in time? And it's going to push things back by a year. Well, in this case, being a big construction project, your price increases across a year could be 10+% easy. And so there's a cost to all of these types of delays. So there's more headlines. I won't read them all out. But basically, what we're seeing on the cost side is from a client perspective, one point we've made, right, is that cost escalation varies wildly by project type. So you got to be careful depending on what is the makeup of your project and your budget. Budget reasonableness is iffy at best. A lot of sticker shock out there, as we saw in those news examples, and you can search your own examples in the news. The reaction to that, unfortunately, is many clients being tempted by low bid. Hey, let's cancel this. Let's go back out. Let's hope for the best. And rarely has our team seen that work. And some clients think that they could just demand more and it'll all work out for them. So that's tough. Speed, time has never been more critical. When things are escalating at some of those rates that you saw earlier on even a per month basis, any amount of time that you can shave off your procurement timeline, getting things down from months and weeks to literal days sometimes is going to be a big deal and has direct bottom line effect for you as a client. Obviously, on the supplier side, very hard to forecast costs in this environment. Contingencies are unbalanced, and the more that clients are keeping these kind of hidden in how you're collecting and soliciting prices and not being able to see some of this stuff, then what we're doing is giving advantage to the biggest gamblers, which might put our contract at greatest risk down the line. Clients often are pushing risk to their prime vendors, who in turn are pushing that into their subs and throughout the supply chain, which is risky. And what we're actually seeing in the real data is, although the headlines will show that raw revenues are up for most business entities out there, that's from retail, construction, design, business professional services, IT. Like most firms on the vendor side, their revenues are up. But what you're also not seeing in the news is margins are down because they're absorbing some of these costs. Cash flows are at greater risk. So we have a more precarious supplier environment than you might typically see, even though it seems like, well, everyone's busy and the money is flowing. What is the actual effect on bottom line? That's another matter altogether. So we're seeing a lot of this in our work across the country where clients are seeing, hey, I'm seeing in the news that revenues are up for my suppliers. Why are they complaining about some of these challenges and issues and bringing that up? They're fine. But the reality is, yeah, revenue is up. They're busier than ever before, but margins are more narrow. So scary. Supply chain environment in general. All we've done here is pulled some headlines for you and put some dates on them. So obviously the tariff stuff ongoing. The main point here is just it's across the spectrum, right? We've got examples from video game companies to 3M to your toothpastes, tariff uncertainties around the shipping going on. So Knight Swift here, one of the largest transportation groups in the country, had spoken to 40 or 50 of their largest client groups in the last couple of months as this stuff was starting to hit. And there's really three strategies that organizations are taking in the marketplace. One is just to proceed as normal, saying we can't control any of the tariff stuff anyway. We'll just see where the chips land. Other folks are slowing down, trying to cut back and trying to shift where they're buying things from. And then the third approach is just wait and see, just kind of press pause and see what's going to happen here. Now, when we asked all of you in our survey around what you're seeing in terms of changes in market conditions, about half of you had already started seeing price increases as early as about a month ago in early April, and other changes and effects here as well. Other things we're seeing in the news, you may have seen this recently on the retail side. We had the trio of Walmart, Home Depot, and Target going to the White House and saying that we're mere weeks away from having shortages on the shelves because it takes a little bit of time for that lag to work its way through the system. That was towards late April, and a week later, you started to see some of them bringing in their shipments and saying they're going to handle the costs. Right over my head here is the one that's sad for me, is if any of you are planning to do some summer camping, let's hope that Hershey is able to get some relief so we can get chocolate in our s'mores. So it's just really everything being affected right now. These are just some samples too that are showing you Out there, there are different dashboards and lead time trackers. These are just three different examples. And the main takeaway here is that lead times just remain elevated. They remain really long. It takes a while to get things. So what that means for us on the client side is potentially earlier decision making on projects, which can put pressure on our teams. That has a cash flow effect as well for how we're funding things. All of this is part of the current economic reality. I was going to put a bunch of headlines in here about the broader geopolitical unrest across the globe. Then I thought some of those headlines just seem scary and sad. But I mean, all the things going on that are affecting broader global supply chains as well. And who knows what the next big surprise might be there. On the supply chain side here, I know we're zooming through quickly, but things that we could be considering. Yeah, my coffee price is from you. That's ouch. Essential goods here. Expanding typical requirements and specs, like we might need to be more flexible as buyer organizations than we have been before. I know sometimes for across our facilities, for example, might have certain things that we like to keep consistent. How much can we bend on some of that if we're facing some supply chain disruptions or delays? Might need to be thinking about that in our upfront scoping. How do we, in our solicitations, more readily allow for alternatives, for options, for new ideas, for things to be put forward by our supply chain partners who might have more information than we even have in our isolated owner organization? Hopefully, our partners out there that we're soliciting proposals from are seeing things from many clients like us across the country and beyond. So sometimes they see what the latest in the market is and can give us some options. We need to make sure that our solicitations are more flexible than ever to allow for that, which in some public procurement groups, the mentality is, nope, I have to narrowly define this scope and everyone compete based upon that. I can't consider other options. I'm probably over exaggerating there, but we need to be more ready and willing to be able to look at those options when they're coming back in our proposals. Validation that what is being promised in the proposal is actually true and is a reality will become more critical going forward. And then we already mentioned this one, but the readiness for our internal teams for earlier decision making and project timelines, especially on our larger capital projects, to the extent that you all are involved with those. The lead times get to be pretty long for different piping, for electrical items, and so on, various building components. So sometimes we're trying to decide that early on, which then locks you into design and scope decisions for the rest of the project. So that's all part of it. Let's talk spending here, rapid fire continuing on. So where we want to head to on this is just to say, like, acknowledging that there have been some large spending bills that are working their way through the system still. So you had the Inflation Reduction Act, CHIPS Act. Before that, we had the infrastructure bill. Trillions of dollars flowing through. I think the news was often saying that when the Trump administration came in, kind of transitioning in, it's kind of that transition period from election to actual startup in January, about half of the money had been allocated from the infrastructure bill, which meant the other half is not yet spent. And so it's all still working its way through the system here. And so that tidal wave of spending and activity is still out there, causing busyness and so on and so forth. When we asked all of you in the survey of, are you seeing, go cooling of competition or an increase in competition, or an orange here is just about the same in the last, 3 months or so, starting of the year. We split it out by the different industries. So AEC, architectural engineering, construction, facility management type of services, business consulting services, and IT here over my shoulder. For the most part, folks say things seem to be about the same, or in gray, you're seeing a little bit more competition, a little bit heating up of things here as well, especially on the IT side of it over there. We also asked you all just what's the single most important procurement that you have on your plate coming up in the next few months. And then we stacked them all up here. The biggest is a lot of you are doing large capital projects. That's the big thing coming up. A lot of large IT systems, professional services. So, all over the place, but these are some big projects and may even be linked to some of those spending bills that we mentioned before. Other things going on, like big, broad macroeconomic trends as a country. The U.S. government continues to be spending in deficit here. So you can see trillions of dollars here in deficits. We're currently on track to set a new record again this year, getting pretty close. So that's a challenge. We can talk about what that means for costs and price levels and inflation and so on. Another thing going on here, as interest rates go up, you can see that there's a pretty large increase in our government's expenditures on just pure interest payments to finance our country's debts. It's really jumped up since 2020. Essentially, it's doubled since then. There's quite a bit of the current debt that's on short-term paper and going to be rolled over, and that's going to work its way through the system here as well. Workforce. All right. So a couple big charts here coming out of the UN data. We wanted to show you just a few things going on. So first up here is just percentage of the population that's over age 60, so around that retirement age and beyond. Essentially what's happened is that level has doubled from what it's historically been and is only, these are your forecasts of different bands of probability with the central tendency here in the middle of the yellow, basically saying that it's not going to level off until the mid 2030s. So another decade of just aging in our overall population here is expected, which just means obvious things, which is when I flip to the next charts and I look at the population from 25 to 64, that's kind of your core working career age. Obviously, there's some earlier entrants and some later participants, but that's your core as across the overall US population. And that percentage of the population is shrinking over time. And we're going to see that continue to shrink for the next decade or so. And then we'll see what happens after that. So just from a workforce standpoint, things are a little bit constrained. And thanks, Jake, for chiming in on the Canadian side. So it's just what this can mean for procurement, right, is a lot of our traditional assumptions are that if we put out a solicitation, there's enough workforce available and skilled enough to do whatever that thing is. And what we're going to be seeing here is an increasingly constrained environment going forward. And that's going to affect both our internal workforce and who we're partnering with in the industry. And it's something we're going to have to accommodate. Basically, where we're heading is a workforce and skill constrained environments more so than ever before. It's really not how the last 4 or 5 decades have gone, as the baby boomers have worked their way through both the US and Canada as the largest generation our countries have respectively seen. The workforce was more plentiful. There was availability of workers and a particular work ethic that goes along with that competition. And that's starting to change now, which is going to affect our procurements. This is percentage of our population here in the US under 25 years of age, kind of entering the workforce. We're here in the blue circle. We're at this little plateau, and then it's going to level off over time. So in other words, we don't really have any reinforcements coming, is what the longer term perspective is. In our survey to you all, about 2/3 of your procurement professional peers who responded to this survey, about 2/3 of them felt that you were understaffed to some level. Either most of were somewhat understaffed, but just under or severely understaffed outright. It's about 2/3. The rest would say, hey, we're about right. No one's really feeling overstaffed at the moment here. So that pressure is on. Usually you're seeing that be expressed in terms of increased volumes of workload on any individual person. So that's something that we need to be thinking about. How do we increase production or productivity to handle some of these challenges? About half of you said you were hiring. Yeah, it's not just availability of staff, Desiree. It's we had a separate question beyond just are you hiring and for how many positions. We also asked how many additional full-time employees would you need to feel adequately staffed. And that's a different answer than how many positions are open and available. We've also heard stories both from coast to coast here of procurement groups who did get approval for additional positions but are unable to even fill their existing positions because of the talent shortage that they're seeing out there. So it's a twofold challenge around. I definitely recognize what Desiree is saying about budgets and funding of those positions, but it's also, do we have adequate folks available to fill them? When we did ask you that question, by the way, in the survey here, on a scale of 1 to 10, saying, hey, applicants that we're looking at are extremely impressive to, run away, I'm never going to hire them. 5 being, yeah, they're about right, matching our expectations. That's where you all assess the talent pool right now, is that the talent pool is exactly average, just kind of meeting your expectations, not wowing you, not overly scaring you. So that's where we're at now in terms of the overall pool. And as Jake mentioned, that we can send these out again and get more updates. We're also planning, I'll mention this at the end, we're going to send out, there's more questions that we asked than what we're sharing in the slides, and we'll send that out to all of you, as well as some simple summary reports coming out of the sessions here as well. This is just showing you that fertility rates are down. We used to be at somewhere between 2 to 3, almost 4 kids per couple, and now we are well below replacement levels in all the G7 countries. And so we're kind of trending all down towards where you may have seen in the news, Japan and Italy have been in the past. So again, upcoming workforce to backfill needs is going to be a constrained environment. Another big thing that's happening, and we're probably going to have a whole upcoming session about this one of the quarters, where we'll spend 15, 20, 30 minutes on this topic alone, is that the actual composition of our workforce is changing as well. As of about a year and a half ago, this is the first time that the young Gen Z generation, that's essentially anyone under the age of 28 or so, their participation in the workforce has eclipsed that of the baby boomers. So baby boomers are already about 2/3 retired out, and that acceleration continues to increase. And so that finally flipped about a year and a half ago. So a lot of times we think of the workforce as being dominated by the baby boomers, but it's now, Gen X, you're in the leadership role a little bit more. Us older millennials are in there too. And the millennials overall are the greatest share of the workforce, but Gen Z is coming in, and they will soon be heard. Almost none of them responded to this survey. I think we had under 5 responses from Gen Zers. So we're not seeing that in the procurement workforce, at least in our current survey. But it's something that you're going to experience more and more and more. And a couple of notes that we're going to cover in greater detail, and what the implications are and what it's going to mean for us as procurement organizations is just that the Gen Z cohort of the workforce is a different cohort. They are highly anxious. Mental health is a greater challenge than ever measured before. They're largely pessimistic in their outlook for various reasons. Their work ethic is a little bit different as well for various reasons, and it's not all just negatives here. And we're also seeing an extended adolescence, in other words, a delayed maturity in terms of working experience and professional and relational skills is something that's happening. It's starting to affect how our organizations are running and how we're motivating teams and so on and so forth. It's going to have some real dramatic implications for leadership. And so we're going to cover this at a future session, but I know today is like a smorgasbord, just running through a bunch of different things, just painting an overall picture of stuff that's going on, for lack of a better term. Finally, we want to talk about technology. So when we asked in the survey back in April, a couple things we had asked, just for example, let's just pick the hot button topic of AI. So how many of you are using artificial intelligence directly within your procurement job functions? And it was exactly split, about 50-50 is what we were seeing. And that was pretty consistent across the generational cohorts. Maybe you look at this and say that us older millennials, for Jake and I, there's a little bit more of a yes in there of using AI, but for the most part, it's pretty consistent across the generations here. And again, we really didn't have much in the way of Gen Z or Zoomers responding at this point in time. So specific AI tools being used. ChatGPT is the runaway leader, followed by Microsoft Copilot, and then other things as well. Some of the others, by the way, in here, some of them are some of our favorites actually across our group. So like Google's Notebook LM, very cool. There's various copy AI tools, Grammarly. Some of you mentioned some procurement items, Power BI capabilities as well. So different things like that are contained in that other category. What are folks using it for? So we're using it a lot for scope development and market research. So really early on solicitation planning and supporting our internal client groups, developing the solicitation itself, overall planning and strategy. So we're having I think more of us are gaining trust in AI as almost a friend and a colleague to help us plan things out and organize things, developing criteria, data analysis. Others included things like compliance and regulation, checking that, building presentations, helping with emails and communications, preparing documents, transcription features like you would have on a webinar like this, and so on. For the sessions that our team are helping with different boot camps on AI use, quick plug, by the way, for NASPO Reach coming up in July. We're going to have NASPO's putting on a whole half-day pre-conference workshop on an AI boot camp. And one of the cool things we're excited to talk about there is how to use AI for negotiations. This should not be 14%. This should be way, way, way higher. and using it for negotiation purposes. So we'll be doing some hands-on use cases with the attendees at NASPO Reach in July over in Denver. So register for that if you haven't already. States, come on. Things that we're expecting across our team to be AI impacts on procurement is pretty soon you're going to have scopes written by AI. I mean, already, what do we say? Almost 2/3 of you are using AI for scope development if you're using AI. RFPs, solicitations written by AI, proposals in response from our suppliers written by AI. We've got some funny stories on that we can tell you. Pricing over time is going to be compiled and verified by AI as well. Contracts themselves developed, negotiated by AI. We haven't even mentioned AI agents here who can work autonomously and perform tasks. I know they're not there quite yet, but they are getting close. So all of this is happening. And for those of you, let me see if I can find this. I'm going to jump ahead here on my slides, but we asked if any of you are concerned about AI affecting procurement jobs. And for those of you who use AI, who said, yes, I use AI, you're actually less concerned that it's going to replace your job than those of you who have not really used AI within your procurement function. It was a little bit more split, a little bit more concern of this maybe unknown thing that could be coming. And so that was an interesting result. We are wondering why that might be and have potential theories. But one thing I do want to point out with AI is we think it is going to be a disruptive force. And a few notes that we're kind of picking up on here is that the news cycle, what you hear about AI is pretty outdated relative to what the AI labs themselves, like OpenAI or Anthropic and so on, Google DeepMind, et cetera, what they can actually do is pretty far beyond what the news is saying. Recently, capabilities of AI systems that are even publicly available have essentially gone exponential. Like if you look at this here, these are different benchmarks of AI performance. I won't bore you with the details, but I kind of nerd out on it. You can see the last few years looked like a slow linear increase, different slopes in some of these different areas, like math had a higher slope rate than trivia questions, for example. But if you look at just the late part of 2024, things started going vertical. And so the amount of progress that happened just in the last 4 to 6 months of what these systems are capable of. And again, these are even the publicly available systems that we all can use for free or for small fees. They have skyrocketed. So if you used AI last year and you haven't really used it again, and you were like, I wasn't that impressed with it for what I was trying to do. I mean, try it again. It's things have moved quickly here. So there's all of that going on. So the capabilities are changing quickly. AI agents are very close, but they're not here yet. They're going to continue to get more task specific. There's tons of startups in the AI space. We were researching for in getting ready for AI boot camps like coming up at NASPO Reach here in July. We were looking at different procurement solutions. There's a lot of vendor tools and how to reply and respond to RFPs coming. And there's just tons of them. None of them have really stood out yet, but they're coming. And there's other things happening too that we can talk about. Basically, the theme here is it's increasingly getting impressive and going to have more direct applications in our professional lives. Wide range of cultures and attitudes across procurement groups out there when you all responded to the survey, mostly kind of neutral-ish, either leaning supportive or leaning cautiously proceeding is the feedback we got. Also a wide range on what the actual strategy of your procurement groups are. Don't have one, maybe testing some pilot things. And I saw a couple things in here saying our policy says don't use it. We did see some funny responses from folks that said that their policy said that not to use it, but then they replied and said they are using it. So effect of those policies there. What we think is going to happen is we do think that AI will fundamentally change the supplier-client relationship going forward. It's something that's going to happen pretty rapidly, we think. For example, what that could look like is that the written proposal itself is going to have less and less value because they're all going to be more beautifully written. ChatGPT alone is a better writer than basically any human I know. And we're seeing a lot more feedback across the country from client groups saying, yeah, these proposals are starting to look really the same. And many of you might also have developed your own personal skill set for identifying kind of with your smell test of, hey, that sounds like AI wrote it. Qualification similarly, the actual people and team that's being proposed to you is going to be the most critical thing. pricing itself is going to become more automated as well. So it's going to fundamentally change how we approach solicitations. It's something we might talk about in a future session for procurement currents, and certainly at the boot camp at NASPO Reach. So big picture here. I've talked for too long, giving you a general survey of things. We'll open it up for more questions, and Jake and Ken on our team to chime in here as well. But just big picture implications here, right? So things we've covered. Costs have exploded. Workforce on this is the skill set is diluting and the workforce is changing. Technology is changing rapidly as well. Uncertainty is the overall theme of the supply chain for sure in this presentation. And who knows what's coming, right, in this uncertain time. Another thing that we have to consider is we've been in a hot market and a growth market for a long time, a dozen years or more. And so we did get the first negative GDP read here in 2025 Q1. Is that a sign of things to come? Is it a blip? I was listening to some analysis this morning about how some of the tariff stuff kind of pulled imports forward, which hit GDP math and how it's calculated in a funky way. So we will see. But as we all know, economics are cyclical, and a growth period won't last for forever. So it's something we want to have on our radar as procurement organizations is what happens if we go from a currently hot market to a slower one? How do we handle that, and so on? Now, what does this all mean for procurement professionals? There's a multi-step approach that we're going to recommend here, but step one is to decide the following. There's really one of two paths ahead of us as procurement organizations. Belief number one, this is all temporary. Everything that Brian here just covered, it's just kind of weird. It's a blip. Things are going to settle back down to how they were. That's one belief. The other belief is, nope, we're in a completely new economy and we're going to need to adjust accordingly. We are in a period of transformational change. It's really completely different divergent views here. I think that we are seeing more and more folks leaning towards belief number two. But as recently as a year or two ago, I'd say the majority were still in belief number one. Our take at the Center for Procurement Excellence is to really, I guess, quote a famous philosopher from the Chicago area back in the 80s, one Mr. Bueller, that says things change pretty quickly. And we think that the folks who don't stop and look around at everything that's happening might be missing the story of what's going on. So we tend to believe more in belief number two. So back to what procurement should do is decide that question, right, of are we in that new economy? We're going to say yes, that's not going back. Some of these macro trends are just too big and too powerful. So then what does that mean? Step number two is it's time to start adjusting our mental models of how we even think about procurement. Beware of doing things, rinse and repeat. We've always done it that way. I know I've been guilty of going back to that last solicitation and pressing copy paste to get prepped for the next one. It's all part of it, but that has never been more risky. A lot of traditional assumptions of how we procure and approach projects, those assumptions have never been less valid, I should say. Our contracts and our approach to those, the terms and conditions that we assume stable pricing, available skill, clients that don't always look down the full supply chain of what they're buying and just looking at the prime vendor and just say that the rest of it is that prime vendor's problem. Treating many products like a commodity and we'll just kind of price it out. It's like all of those assumptions are going to be at risk. And our normal approach of just saying as clients, let's transfer that risk to the vendor community. They're in a better position to handle them, and just we can close our eyes to it. That is not a good approach going forward. And we'll delve into more of that as these procurement currents go on, or if you have questions about it. That's kind of our next step, is start thinking in a different way and start re-examining some of the assumptions and kind of foundational pieces of how we approach procurement and projects. And then step three is, in a time of uncertainty, building resiliency and adaptability now is a big deal, we think. And then starting to upskill and prepare for transformation now as a workforce solution is another big thing as we enter a increasingly workforce constrained environment. So that would be our main recommendations overall. So that's a big survey of where things are at. We've got some time left for questions and discussion, but first a quick thank you, especially those of you who participated in that survey that we had sent out, and you were featured in the slides here as well. As a quick announcement on that, if you registered for this session, you'll get an opportunity to participate in the next round of the survey, which we will then update going forward as a part of these procurement current sessions through NASPO. You'll see an email coming in on Tuesday, May 13th with that. It'll be from Amy at centerforprocurement.org. for your chance to participate and respond. What we're also going to do for those who have been registered here is we'll get out some of the key points of today's presentation. NASPO has a copy of the slides as well that they can pass out. And then there are additional bits of information across the surveys that we've done that get into more detail on tariffs, market conditions, workforce trends, and also AI usage. And we're going to go ahead and get those put out as summary reports with more detail than we had in the slides here. So that'll be for your reading pleasure. Those will get blasted out to you all here in the coming weeks, as well as our team of volunteers is able to work on them and get them to you. We're basically assuming one of these reports per week coming out over the next 4 or 5 weeks here is the plan. And then we look ahead to our next session together of Procurement Currents in August for additional conversations. So again, thank you very much for attending the inaugural session. I hope that some of this was helpful. It was a big, huge survey of things to summarize. We think that we are in a new economy. Costs, supply chain, workforce, the composition of the workforce and available technology out there all are transforming in front of our very eyes. And we think it's going to affect how we procure things going forward for the next 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, and beyond. So again, thank you for your time. We're going to pause here. I know there are some questions in the chat, and then Ken and Jake on our team, they've been out on the road for some, with various procurement groups, even venturing up to our friends in Canada lately. So I want to pause and allow for more comments to be offered and your questions to come in here as well. So pause that share and open it up to the floor. Ken and Jake, other things or things I missed in the chat as we were yapping away there?
No, I think one of the big things I was going to hit on here is that, Brian kind of alluded that, our stated explicitly that we fundamentally believe that we are in a new environment, that things are not going to go back the way they were. And just to reiterate that this is truly a different time we're in, and that the future is in many ways going to be a lot different than it has been for the last 20 or 30 years in terms of how we manage procurement, our contract structures. And so there's a lot of change coming, and we would just encourage you all to seriously consider reevaluating how some of the things that are done here. Ken, any comments from you or questions, comments?
No. That's a good summary. Nothing to add. See many questions here, lots of thank yous. Yeah, it's going to be probably 10 years of transition, so it kind of gets to a new steady state, but we don't really know. just a guess.
What have you guys been hearing around just some of the various procurement groups? And I know like Jake and I had another group on NASPO's Procurement U yesterday for our Better RFPs class. What are you all hearing in terms of how all of these various big trends are affecting the procurement function itself? What have you seen, Jake and Ken?
I think the most immediate challenge this next 5 to 7 years will be just if we feel that we're borderline staffed appropriately or a little bit understaffed, that's going to get more severe. And not only just in terms of filling the slots, let's say, filling the positions, but the maturity level, the skill level is going to be dropping quite a bit. So you're going to have that AI probably won't get here fast enough to significantly, appease some of those and minimize some of the impacts. That'll be the first thing is you'll have a talent gap and just a personnel gap, just a staffing gap. But as from a public standpoint, demand for public services isn't going to drop off for 25 years. So demand's going to stay the same, but your workforce to meet that demand and the tax revenue to meet that demand is going to decrease. So you're going to be in a more budgetary constraint and a staffing constraint, which kind of go together. But in terms of demand, it's not going to change. That's going to be the next big challenge. So efficiency, collaboration, working through those things. That's going to be the transition period for the new economy.
Ken, I also going to ask you to follow up. Sometimes when I do the survey of the landscape here, like we just did, it can come across a little bit negative. You want to share some of your optimism, perhaps? I think we are actually kind of excited for the time to come. Time of change is, there is a natural reaction of being, it's uncertain. There's some anxiety causing aspects, but then it's also means it's interesting. There's some opportunities coming. I think that striking while the iron is hot is part of it. But Jake, what are your thoughts on some optimism, and Ken chime in too?
Well, I think that, for example, when you think about the development of AI, I mean, we've only been at this for, like, ChatGPT came out in November 22. Now we're just over 2.5 years later, and the developments and the changes that have happened the last even 6 months has been staggering. So when you think about, for the benefit of humanity, is resolving some of these, major medical challenges that we deal with as a society, there's a very legitimate possibility that these will be resolved or significantly better than they ever have been. I mean, many times, the way I kind of looked at it too, honestly, folks, is that we are, I think we're honestly in a technological revolution happening before our eyes. And the opportunity to be as part of that, to help lead the change, to help move our organizations forward here, this doesn't come around very often. And I think from that standpoint is extremely exciting. And the real public goods that are going to come from what's going forward here is kind of what I think is an exciting viewpoint.
When you say technological change, Jake, you kind of mean AI and capabilities there, I think. And I wonder how you and Ken rate it, or others online, because like I view it on this spectrum of like, there's the industrial revolution, and the build out of the electric grid is kind of one extreme. Then there's like the internet and communications revolution. I feel like AI is going to be somewhere in there. It's very transformational, I think, is the right word you used.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Ken, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think from a procurement standpoint, if you look across the next, it's already started. I think it'll get more severe in terms of some of the challenges. But from a procurement standpoint, from a positive perspective, the smart organizations will realize and expand the importance and role of procurement. The ability to identify, attract, and properly select down the line, the supply chain, is going to be a more and more challenging skill set to obtain. And the marketing is the marketing, sales, business development, all of those things are going to become even more misaligned to reality from what we're buying. You're going to see raw material shortages, that we already are seeing those, and the replacements that are being put in to meet the requirements or specifications or standards of different materials and everything we buy aren't as good as the historical ones in most cases, but they pass the QC test, right? So they work in the laboratory, but they don't last 5 or 6 years in the actual usage. So that those procurement organizations that are highly informed, have their finger on the pulse of what's happening through the supply chain, are able to cut through some of the marketing and the sales and drive to real performance and knowledge information. Those are the ones that are going to be, expanding their critical role inside the organization and be a core conduit for how value and meeting of needs is actually accomplished. And then just higher and better quality relationships with the service providers, vendors, suppliers, contractors. That's going to be critical. And I personally believe that expertise is going to become less and less valuable. So as if you look at just AI, the difference between an average person and an expert is what it is right now. Well, an expert's going to stay about where they're at, but you give an average person some type of artificial intelligence toolbox, they're going to get really close to an expert. And so we're not going to be the purchasing process of how we try to actually buy value is going to change, and what's seen as valuable will shift potentially. And so within that, I think that trust, like actual trust, we'll see a expansion of definition, and we may get to a point where trust is almost like a currency. It's going to have some level of transactable value, and building that out, because you're not going to know if you can trust the organization, the data, the AI output. Trust is going to be very, very valuable moving forward. So procurement organizations and public agencies that are trustworthy, and establish that and act in good faith in terms of how they adopt AI, use AI, take care of their people, et cetera. I think they will have a significant competitive advantage as we roll forward here in the next 5 years. So,
And to be clear, Ken, you said adopt AI, use AI, but you really just mean also just good fundamental relationships with our suppliers. So how do we pay? How do we treat folks? How do we negotiate?
and you can't shift this risk, right? So you can contractually shift supply chain risk to a vendor, but that doesn't manage it at all, right? And they're not in a position to manage that risk. Most of your point of sale don't really have any sway of the supply chain, for most things, not all things. So that is going to be that the contractual relationship we have will probably, I think it should already be different. A lot of our historical contract clauses, indemnities, risk, insurance structures are just not built. I mean, they make assumptions that there's an available workforce, there's available supply chain and stable, pricing is predictable, and those things just aren't true. And so a lot of our contractual structures don't match present reality, and the force majeure and escalation clauses and all these things we have that we just say those are our kind of safety nets. They're just not practical, and to invoke those is so significant. So yeah, that's going to be a hard shift. You won't be able to do that overnight. And then, from a legal perspective, probably the biggest barrier to making these changes is the legal side, because they see risk and the answer is no, right? So, the AI is risky, can't use it. Oh, this gives our city, our county, our state more risk, not going to do it. And they're just looking from a financial exposure. But that's not going to be the real risk exclusively. It's going to be, does the water even flow through the pipes anymore? Right? That's a bigger risk than the financial exposure you might have in a contract for the system you're building now that was the last 25 years. So I think those things are going to be the harder issues to manage. That's why trust and working through that. We don't see many people thinking that way. And it will be by the time it's obvious, it'll be so hard to fix. Versus if you make changes now, it'll be a lot easier to get ahead of it.
For those interested, I saw Rebecca from NASPO had put in a comment about energy needs for AI and build out and things like that. And so I linked my personal favorite graph in there from an AI research firm, Epoch AI, so I can take a look if that's interesting to folks. Another quick note, we will hang out if folks have questions or want to discuss anything further. We're more than happy to hang out a little bit longer. Our team booked a little extra time to do that. But things to expect going forward. I know this is a quarterly series. This is our very first one, so hopefully we did okay and you want to come back. We're going to be doing this a little bit live as we go forward. So we anticipate that we will have more deep dives on some of these topics in the future. We will probably pick them at times, even with what's in the news the week that we have the session, because things are moving quickly. But we do anticipate amongst our team in terms of our planning, we anticipate having some future sessions about AI specifically, AI agents specifically, about the changing workforce composition, Gen Z, how to lead Gen Z, what are some of the differences that we're seeing? Why is some of this happening? Because you saw part of our step that we recommended is just adjusting mental models. What we have found is that with some of these changes, it just the first step is just an acceptance that this is what things are, or what really is, or what is happening. And so I think sometimes to further describe these trends and phenomena that are happening is valuable in and of itself, because it builds awareness. You've seen that probably in other areas of work where they say acceptance is the first step. It's kind of true with how things are changing here as well. So we have all of those various topics in mind for future procurement currents. Hope to see you join us, and we're happy to take any other suggestions or questions that you may have here as well. Melissa, good question. Are you automatically signed up? You might need to register for the future ones. I don't think the link stays exactly the same. Julia's nodding her head.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
So just keep an eye out on the same notification systems that you've seen. We can also build you into the CPE notification list, and we'll put out an additional, from two fronts when NASPO announces it, and we can announce it through CPE as well. And then it'll be on the same registration page for webinars that NASPO hosts.
Thanks, Brian. I want to thank the RFP doctors, Brian, Jake, and Ken, for the valuable information they've shared and for working with NASPO to bring it to you. Thank you for attending today's webinar. As mentioned, you'll receive a follow-up email containing today's slides and materials. Remember, this webinar qualifies as 1 contact hour for your continuing education credits. To receive your certificate, please complete the survey in the upcoming email. This webinar has been recorded and will be available for viewing on the NASPO YouTube page. Questions entered into the chat and boxes will also be saved. Lastly, please check out NASPO's upcoming webinar on May 28th, Procurement Under FEMA Awards. You can register at naspo.org. Thanks again to our RFP doctors, wonderful presenters, so much information to digest. We appreciate it. And thank you to our guests. Have a great day.